long before the Inca rose to power, when the great civilizations of the Andes were still carving their presence into stone. A remarkable culture thrived in the isolated highlands of what is now northern Peru. Today we call them the Chachapoya, name that can be translated as people of the clouds. It is a title as poetic as it is descriptive. For their homeland is a dramatic landscape where steep mountains plunge into rainforest valleys, and where a perpetual mist drifts like breath from the earth. To imagine the Chachapoya world. Picture the point where two ecosystems meet. To the east, the dense Amazon basin, hot and alive with endless vegetation. To the west, the stark Andean ridges, cold and unforgiving. The Chachapoya occupied the threshold between these worlds. Their settlements rose thousands of meters above sea level on ridges so narrow that even today travelers feel as if they are walking the spine of the sky. From these heights they could look down on the green ocean of the jungle while still feeling the bite of the mountain wind. It was a natural fortress, a vantage point that offered both protection and opportunity. Geography, as destiny geography, shaped everything about Chachapoya life. The steep slopes demanded ingenuity. Terraces for farming, stone paths that clung to the mountainsides, and ingenious water management systems that captured the mists and rains. Their climate gave them access to an unusual range of resources. From the lowlands came tropical fruits, medicinal plants, and the prized feathers of jungle birds. From the highlands, they obtained hardy grains, tubers, and grazing for llamas. This intersection of environments fostered a trade network that stretched far beyond their own valleys, connecting them to the great Andean cultures of the coast and interior. Yet the same terrain that enriched them also isolated them. Dense cloud forests and sheer cliffs discouraged large invading armies and limited contact with distant kingdoms. Over generations, this encouraged a fiercely independent identity. Spanish chroniclers centuries later would describe the Chachapoya as white of skin and handsome of form, a phrase more reflective of colonial fascination than scientific observation, but one that hints at how distinct they seemed even to their contemporaries. Whether tall stature or fairer features were reality or myth, the Chachapoya clearly stood out not only in appearance, but in the confidence with which they occupied their lofty world. First impressions from the past, because the Chachapoya left no written language. Much of what we know comes from archaeology and the accounts of outsiders, Inca conquerors, than Spanish invaders. Those accounts speak of a people renowned for their bravery, agility, and skill in warfare. The Inca, who eventually subdued them, recorded that the Chachapoya were among the most difficult nations to conquer. The Spanish, arriving decades later, found them ready allies against their former Inca overlords, impressed by their willingness to resist authority of any kind. Archaeological evidence confirms a society of surprising complexity. Stone fortresses crown isolated peaks. Cliff faces hide sculpted tombs that have withstood centuries of rain. Pottery shards, woven textiles, and delicate featherwork reveal both artistic refinement and long-distance exchange. The Chachapoya were not a small, scattered tribe, but a network of communities, capable of grand construction projects and sophisticated spiritual practices. Life in the cloud forest daily. Life for the Chachapoya was inseparable from the cloud forest environment. Farmers cultivated maize, potatoes, and quinoa on steep terraces, while also tapping the surrounding jungle for bananas, coca leaves, and medicinal herbs. Hunters pursued deer and small mammals. Fishermen worked the mountain streams. The forest itself provided building materials and food, but also demanded respect. Legends passed down through modern descendants speak of spirits that dwell in waterfalls and caves, a reminder that the natural world was alive with power. Their settlements reflected a deep understanding of landscape. Houses were typically circular, built from finely cut limestone blocks and crowned with conical thatched roofs. Many were decorated with zigzag friezes or diamond patterns, motifs that may have symbolized the dualities of their world: sky and earth, life and death, rain and sun. Larger sites included plazas for communal gatherings and ceremonial rituals, suggesting a strong social fabric that bound families and clans together. despite the isolation of mountain life, masters of stone and sky. Among the most astonishing achievements of the Chachapoya was Kuélap, a massive walled city perched on a limestone ridge at 3,000 meters above sea level. Often called the Machu Picchu of the North, Kuélap predates the Inca citadel by centuries and in sheer scale surpasses it. The outer wall alone stretches more than 600 meters and rises up to 20 meters high. Built from millions of stone blocks without mortar, narrow funnel-shaped entrances forced visitors to approach in single file. A clever defensive design that could be defended by only a handful of warriors. Inside these walls once stood hundreds of roundhouses, temples, and ceremonial platforms. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of intricate drainage systems and storage areas for food. Testimony to careful planning. The site speaks not just of military necessity, but of civic pride, a belief that human skill could tame even the clouds. And Kuélap was not unique. Dozens of similar, though smaller, fortresses the region, each balanced dramatically on its own isolated ridge. A culture of spirit and mystery religion permeated every aspect of Chachapoya life. While details remain speculative, burial practices offer powerful clues. High on vertical cliffs, they constructed Purin Macho's human-shaped sarcophagi that stand sentinel over valleys far below. Some contain multiple mummies, carefully wrapped in textiles and accompanied by offerings of ceramics, food, and tools. Their positioning perched in impossible places. Often in caves accessible only by ropes suggests a belief that the dead should remain close to the heavens, guardians between the earthly and the divine. These burial sites are not merely archaeological curiosities. They are silent conversations with eternity. To climb toward one is to feel the deliberate blending of earth and sky that define Chachapoya spirituality. For them, life was not a straight line, but a cycle where ancestors continued to influence the living. Even today, local communities speak of spirits that inhabit the ruins. A cultural echo that refuses to fade. Contact and change for centuries, the Chachapoya maintained this high-altitude world with minimal interference from larger Andean powers. But in the late 15th century, the Inca Empire expanded northward. Seeking control of strategic trade routes and fertile valleys, the Chachapoya resisted fiercely, retreating to their fortresses and using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to inflict heavy losses. Inca records recount multiple campaigns and stubborn rebellions, evidence of a people determined to remain free. Ultimately, superior numbers and political maneuvering brought them under Inca rule, but never fully subdued their spirit. When Spanish conquistadors arrived a few decades later, the Chachapoya saw in them potential allies against the Inca. Many joined the Europeans, guiding them through difficult terrain and aiding in the capture of Inca leaders. Ironically, this alliance brought catastrophe. European diseases swept through the population, and colonial pressures fractured their society. By the early 17th century, the independent identity of the Chachapoya had all but disappeared, as leaving behind ruins, legends, and a small population of descendants who would carry their memory into the modern age, legacy of the Cloud Warriors today. Walking through the silent stones of Kuélap, or gazing up at a cliff where white sarcophagi peer from shadowed ledges, one feels the persistence of that memory. The forest is slowly reclaiming their cities. But the Chachapoya remain present in the stories of local villagers. In the careful excavation of archaeologists, and in the very name People of the Clouds, which continues to inspire wonder, their story reminds us that civilization is not confined to gentle valleys or wide plains. Human ambition and creativity thrive even in the harshest, most remote landscapes. The Chachapoya prove that where clouds gather and mountains rise, culture can ascend just as high. If Part 1 introduced the Chachapoya as a people suspended between mountain and jungle, Part 2 steps inside their strongholds to explore how they lived, built, and thrived in a land where clouds are constant companions and stone is the only reliable foundation. Kuélap, the mountain fortress dominating the Uticubamba Valley at nearly 3,000 meters above sea level. Kuélap is the best-known testament to Chachapoya ingenuity. Archaeologists estimate that its outer walls 20 meters high in places and nearly 600 meters long required more stone than Egypt's Great Pyramid. Yet Kuélap was not a single military bastion. It was a living city, carefully planned to house and protect thousands. The first approach to Kuélap already reveals a defensive mind. Narrow, funnel-shaped entrances force visitors into single file. Attackers could never storm the city en masse. A handful of defenders could hold off a far larger force. Inside, archaeologists have identified more than 400 circular houses, each built from precisely cut limestone blocks. Low stone walls still trace the outlines of homes, kitchens, and storage pits. Central plazas served as gathering spaces where trade goods arrived. Councils were held, and ceremonies unfolded against a backdrop of swirling mist. Rain is constant here. The builders anticipated it with stone-lined drains and sloped streets that channel water outward. Centuries of vegetation and earthquakes have not erased these systems. Evidence of a sophisticated understanding of both engineering and the volatile Andean climate. A web of hilltop. Settlement Kuélap may be the crown jewel, but it is far from unique. Across the high valleys, archaeologists have mapped hundreds of smaller fortresses Ravache, Grand Pajitan, and many more each, perched on a ridge like an eagle's nest. Together, they formed a defensive network, signaling one another by smoke or fire when danger approached. Some sites appear to have been seasonal, perhaps used for ceremonial gatherings or as refuges during conflict. While others supported year-round communities, the repeated choice of extreme locations was not merely practical. It expressed a worldview, life elevated closer to the heavens, settlements literally among the clouds. These citadels were places of both security and spiritual power, blending the earthly and the sacred in every stone. Homes of stone and symbol the circular dwellings at Kuélap and neighboring sites reflect a culture attuned to cycles rather than straight lines. Each house was topped by a steep conical roof of thatch, anchored by a central wooden pole and ringed with stone benches inside. Many walls bear decorative friezes, zigzags, rhomboids, and serpentine motifs executed in light and dark limestone. Scholars debate their meaning. Some see lightning or mountain rivers. Others interpret them as cosmic dualities of life and death. Sky and earth, domestic artifacts deepen the portrait of daily life. Grinding stones for maize, spindle whorls for spinning cotton or alpaca wool, and fine ceramics with geometric patterns reveal households where agriculture, textile production, and artistry were inseparable. The Chachapoya were not isolated peasants. They participated in long-distance trade, acquiring Amazonian feathers and coastal shells that turned up in burial offerings high in the Andes, farmers of the steep slopes feeding. Thousands on such precipitous land demanded skill. The Chachapoya carved terraces into hillsides, retaining precious soil with stone walls. Here they cultivated maize, potatoes, quinoa, and a remarkable variety of tubers adapted to different microclimates. Above, llamas and alpacas grazed on sparse grasses, providing wool and transport. Below, in warmer valleys, they harvested fruits, coca leaves, and medicinal plants. Proving adept at bridging ecological zones, seasonal migration was common. Families might maintain fields at several altitudes, moving as weather and crops required. Such mobility strengthened trade connections and spread cultural influence far beyond the cloud. Forests dot spiritual geography, every citadel doubled as a sacred space. Caves, waterfalls, and cliff faces held particular sanctity, believed to be dwelling places of ancestors and spirits. Within Kuélap, archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial platforms and small temples, some containing offerings of food, textiles, and miniature figurines. Fire pits with carefully arranged stones suggest rituals of renewal or communication with the spirit world, perhaps. The most haunting spiritual expression lies outside the city walls. The cliffside tombs and sarcophagi, for which the Chachapoya are famous. In remote vertical recesses, unreachable without ropes, stand human-shaped coffins, prune machos, their painted faces still staring across the valleys. Many house bundles of mummified remains, wrapped in fine cloth and accompanied by ceramics, gourds, and food. These placements symbolized both protection and transcendence. Keeping ancestors literally between earth and sky, artistry and identity textiles were covered. From dry caves astonished with their complexity, bright reds, deep indigos, and intricate patterns speak of a highly developed aesthetic. Featherwork iridescent greens and yellows from jungle birds, adorned headdresses and ritual garments, proof of trade with lowland peoples hundreds of kilometers away. Pottery shows similar sophistication, elegant jars and bowls painted with geometric motifs, sometimes depicting animals of the cloud forest such as the spectacled bear or the Andean condor. Such artistry was not mere decoration. Each motif encoded meaning stories of creation, clan lineage, protective symbols. In a world without writing, these designs were a visual language, communicating identity across generations, society and leadership, though definitive records are lacking. Evidence suggests a decentralized society. Instead of a single monarch, the Chachapoya appear to have organized into regional chiefdoms bound by shared culture and mutual defense. Leadership likely combined political and spiritual authority, with chiefs responsible for mediating between the human and spirit realms. Councils of elders may have guided decisions. While skilled warriors defended the network of settlements, gender roles were probably complementary. Rather than strictly hierarchical, grave goods show women buried with fine textiles and ceremonial items, indicating significant status. Agriculture, weaving, and trade required cooperation, reinforcing communal bonds essential for survival in a challenging environment. A living city in the clouds. Imagine arriving at Kuélap in its prime. Terraces bright with maize, smoke rising from hundreds of thatched roofs, traders leading llamas laden with jungle fruits and coastal shells. Children chase each other along narrow stone lanes. Elders gather in the plaza to recount legends as mist curls through the gates. Drums echo during evening rituals, and above it all, the immense walls stand silent. Glowing gold in the late Andean sun, this was no forgotten backwater, but a vibrant, cosmopolitan center where mountain and rainforest cultures met. The Chachapoya transformed harsh geography into a stage for art ceremony and daily life, proving that ingenuity can turn even the most improbable ridge into a thriving city. The Chachapoya had endured centuries of wind and rain, but the 16th century would bring storms of another kind. Their isolated strongholds and fiercely independent spirit protected them from many regional rivals. Yet no stone wall could keep out the ambitions of two rising empires. First the Inca, then the Spanish. The Inca advanced by the late 1400s. The Inca Empire was expanding with relentless speed. Stretching from present-day Ecuador down to Chile, control of the eastern slopes of the Andes where the Chachapoya homeland lay was vital. These high valleys offered access to tropical trade goods and served as a buffer against Amazonian peoples. The Chachapoya did not yield quietly. Inca chronicles describe years of skirmishes as the Inca army pushed north. Chachapoya warriors, nimble on their home terrain, used narrow passes and cloud-shrouded ridges to harry the invaders. They launched ambushes from hidden trails and melted back into the mist before the larger Inca forces could retaliate. Despite their courage, the odds were uneven. The Inca could muster tens of thousands of soldiers, supported by an empire-wide network of roads and supply depots. Chachapoya chiefdoms, though united in culture, lacked a central authority to coordinate long campaigns. Over time, superior numbers and relentless pressure wore them down. Submission and subtle defiance by the reign of Inca Emperor Tupac Inca Yupanqui, the Chachapoya, were formally incorporated into the empire. Yet incorporation did not mean true submission. The Inca imposed governors, collected tribute, and demanded labor for imperial projects. But rebellion simmered just beneath the surface. Several uprisings erupted in the following decades. Chroniclers speak of towns rising in coordinated defiance, forcing the Inca to dispatch punitive expeditions. The conquerors responded with classic imperial tactics, relocating entire communities to distant provinces, a policy known as Mitmac to dilute rebellious energy. Families were torn from ancestral ridges and resettled hundreds of kilometers away. Even under these pressures, Chachapoya identity endured. Oral traditions, distinctive weaving patterns, and sacred cliff burials persisted. The very landscape helped preserve their autonomy. Remote citadels remained difficult to police, and mist-shrouded valleys offered endless hiding, places for those unwilling to bow completely. The arrival of the Spanish when Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors arrived in the 1530s. They entered a region already tense with resentment toward Inca rule. To the Chachapoya, these armored strangers wielding steel weapons and accompanied by horses were a potential means of escape from imperial matwa. Oversight, many local leaders quickly allied with the newcomers. Spanish records note that Chachapoya warriors guided the conquistadors through treacherous passes, provided food, and even fought alongside them in key battles against the Inca. Their intimate knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as the Spaniards marched on Cusco, the Inca capital. At first, this alliance seemed to promise renewed independence. With Inca garrisons scattered and imperial authority collapsing, Chachapoya villages hoped to regain their old freedoms. But liberation was brief. Disease and decline. European arrival brought invisible enemies far deadlier than swords or muskets. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through the high valleys with terrifying speed. Within a generation, entire communities were decimated. Archaeological surveys suggest that population may have fallen by more than 80% between the mid-1500s and early 1600s. The Spanish crown, eager to consolidate its new possessions, imposed tribute systems and Catholic missions. Survivors were resettled into colonial towns, drawn away from their ancestral fortresses. Sacred sites were abandoned, and many of the cliff tombs were looted or left to weather in silence. Echoes of resistance, yet the Chachapoya spirit proved resilient. Some groups retreated deeper into the forested valleys, avoiding Spanish control for decades. Oral histories speak of hidden settlements where old rituals continued in secret. Even today, local families recount legends of ancestors who refused baptism and vanished into the cloud forest rather than submit. The Spanish themselves recorded repeated flare-ups of resistance well into the 17th century. Though these uprisings were ultimately suppressed, they revealed that the Chachapoya never accepted foreign rule as inevitable fate. Legacy of two conquests by the end of the colonial period. The once vibrant network of mountaintop citadels had largely emptied. Many were swallowed by jungle or collapsed under centuries of rain, yet the culture did not disappear entirely. Descendants living in modern Chachapoya's province still carry fragments of language, folklore, and farming techniques that reach back to the people of the clouds. Archaeology has brought renewed attention to their achievements. Each excavation, whether at Kuélap's massive walls or the haunting cliff sarcophagi of Karagia, reclaims a piece of history nearly erased by dual conquests, where empires sought to silence them. The stones continue to speak. A people remembered today, travelers who stand among the moss-covered ramparts of Kuélap or gaze upward at the pale guardians. Gaia sense a quiet defiance. The mist curls, as it did centuries ago, and the mountains echo with the memory of warriors who resisted both the Inca and the Spaniards. The Chachapoya story is one of endurance amid conquest, a reminder that even when empires rise and fall, cultures rooted in their landscape can survive in unexpected ways, in legends whispered by descendants, in patterns woven into modern textiles, and in the silent vigilance of stone sentinels watching over the cloud forests of Peru. When the Spanish colonial period faded into history, the once formidable citadels of the Chachapoya lay hidden beneath a thick cloak of vegetation. For centuries, moss and mist reclaimed the towering limestone walls, while local farmers and travelers passed by with little sense of the grand civilization buried in the clouds. The 19th and 20th centuries would finally bring these lost cities back to the world's attention and reveal how the people of the clouds continue To shape the identity of northern Peru today? Early sightings in the age of exploration. First written hints of Chachapoya ruins appear in Spanish colonial reports and in the travel diaries of 18th and 10th century explorers. Traders and missionaries occasionally described fortresses in the clouds, their accounts mixing awe with speculation. Yet the region's rugged terrain and near-permanent mist deterred systematic study. It was not until the mid-1800s that European naturalists and explorers, including Charles Wiener and Antonio Raimondi, began to document the ruins in greater detail. Their sketches and notes told of immense stone walls, circular dwellings, and remote cliff burials that seemed to defy gravity. Though often romanticized, these reports piqued the interest of archaeologists and adventurers across the Atlantic. Kuélap emerges from the mist among the rediscovered sites. Kuélap became the crown jewel. Perched at 10 meters, by feet. This mountaintop fortress astonished early visitors with its massive perimeter walls, some rising 20 meters high, and hundreds of circular stone houses. Archaeologists estimate that construction began around the 6th century CE, centuries before the rise of the Inca. Excavations revealed intricate friezes of zigzags and diamond patterns, carved into limestone blocks, echoing the designs found on Chachapoya textiles. Layers of occupation showed a city that served not only as a defensive redoubt, but also as a thriving ceremonial and administrative hub. The sheer scale of Kuélap challenged old assumptions that only coastal or high Andean cultures could achieve monumental architecture. Here, in the cloud forest, the people long dismissed as jungle tribes had built a fortress to rival Machu Picchu in grandeur, guardians of the cliffs equally. Striking were the cliff tombs and sarcophagi discovered along sheer limestone walls in the Utisiubumba Valley. At Karagia, human-shaped sarcophagi up to 2.5 meters tall stand like silent sentinels, their painted faces staring across the misty canyon. Each figure contains the bundled remains of an elite individual, carefully positioned to watch over the valley for eternity. These funerary monuments, perched in nearly inaccessible locations, demonstrate the Chachapoya's spiritual connection to the landscape. They believe the dead maintained a watchful presence, bridging the living world and the realm of ancestors. Modern climbers and archaeologists continue to marvel at the engineering required to create such precarious resting places. A dialogue with descendants. While archaeology has brought fame to Chachapoya sites, descendant communities in the Amazonas region have played a vital role in protecting and interpreting this heritage. Many local families maintain oral histories of ancestors who retreated into the Askia forest to escape Inca and Spanish domination. Today, towns such as Chachapoya City and villages across the Utcubamba Valley celebrate festivals that blend Catholic and indigenous traditions, colorful dances, cloud forest harvest rituals, and music that some ethnomusicologists trace back to pre-Inca rhythms. Farmers still practice techniques of terrace cultivation and cloud forest agroforestry that echo ancient methods of managing fragile mountain ecosystems. Tourism and the challenge of preservation. Opening of a cable car to Kuélap in 2017 transformed access to the site, bringing thousands of visitors each year. Increased tourism has boosted the regional economy and spurred pride in local identity. But it has also created new pressures: erosion of ancient walls, the risk of looting, and the delicate balance between public access and conservation. The Peruvian government and international heritage organizations have launched programs to stabilize structures, train local guides, and involve descendant communities in decision-making. The goal is to ensure that Kuélap and related sites remain living symbols of cultural resilience, rather than fragile relics. Lessons. From the clouds, the rediscovery of the Chachapoya carries lessons far beyond archaeology. Their story illustrates how civilizations can thrive in liminal spaces between the high Andes and the Amazon, between drought and deluge, between mountain and jungle. They adapted to an environment where few others dared to settle, using stone, wood, and spiritual insight to create a culture both distinct and interconnected with neighboring peoples. Moreover, Their endurance through conquest, disease, and centuries of obscurity reminds us that cultural survival is not always visible. Even when imperial records declare a people extinct, their language fragments. Agricultural practices and spiritual values can persist. Waiting to be recognized, the people of the clouds today, in the 21st century, the term people of the clouds has become a badge of honor for residents of Peru's Amazonas region. Artisans weave Chachapoya motifs into textiles and pottery. Musicians blend traditional flutes and drums with contemporary genres, creating a living dialogue between past and present. Schools incorporate local history into their curricula, ensuring that children grow up knowing they are heirs to an ancient and sophisticated culture. Visitors who trek through mist-covered forests or stand beneath that towering sarcophagi sense that this is more than a rediscovered ruin. It is a meeting point of time and landscape, where stone walls and swirling fog whisper of ancestors who never truly left. An enduring legacy, the Chachapoya have moved from the margins of history to the center of Peru's national narrative. Once overshadowed by the grandeur of the Inca, they are now celebrated as masters of the cloud forest, innovators of architecture, and resilient keepers of spiritual traditions. Their story of rise, conquest, survival, and rebirth continues to captivate scholars and travelers alike. As the sun breaks through the mist at Kuélap, illuminating walls built more than a millennium ago, the people of the clouds remind us that human creativity and determination can flourish even in the most challenging landscapes. Their legacy is not a relic of the past, but a living testament to the enduring dialogue between nature, culture, and memory. The Chachapoya story does not end with the excavation of Kuélap or the preservation of cliff tombs. In the last few decades, their legacy has begun to influence art, science, and even national identity in ways that reach far beyond the cloud forests of northern Peru. This final section explores how the people of the clouds continue to inspire researchers, creatives, and communities worldwide. Science and the unfolding genetic record. One of the most exciting frontiers is genetic research. Ancient DNA specialists have analyzed remains from Chachapoya burial sites, comparing them to modern populations in the Amazonas region. Early findings reveal a complex genetic tapestry, links to other Andean groups, traces of Amazonian ancestry, and markers unique to the cloud forest corridor. These studies suggest that the Chachapoya were not isolated mountain jungle people, as early Spanish chronicles implied, but active participants in a wide network of trade and migration. This genetic continuity supports what many local families have long claimed, that they are living descendants of the Chachapoya. Far from being wiped out by Inca conquest, their bloodlines and traditions endured quietly for centuries. Echoes in art, film, and literature. International artists have seized upon the mystique of the Chachapoya. Novelists weave tales of lost fortresses and cliff tombs, sometimes embellishing with fantasy, while Peruvian filmmakers produce documentaries that spotlight the culture's sophistication and resilience. Visual artists draw inspiration from the zigzag and diamond motifs of Chachapoya friezes, reinterpreting them in murals and digital installations. Even Hollywood has flirted with the allure of the cloud warriors. Adventure scripts featuring mist-shrouded fortresses or mysterious sarcophagi often borrow sometimes to freely from Chachapoya imagery. While these portrayals occasionally lapse into myth-making, they help spark curiosity and, indirectly, tourism that funds preservation efforts. Community-led revivals, perhaps. The most powerful development is the grassroots revival of Chachapoya traditions. Local artisans in towns such as Limbamba and Chachapoya's city are resurrecting weaving techniques and pottery styles based on archaeological patterns. Culinary entrepreneurs are reintroducing ancient crops like quinoa varieties and native dees, tubers that thrive in cloud forest microclimates. Reinforcing both cultural pride and food security, festivals now blend Catholic saints' days with performances of dances and music that elders say have been passed down since before the Inca era. Children learn songs in Spanish but dance to rhythms their great-grandparents still remember as distinctly people of the clouds. Tourism, as education and risk tourism remains a double-edged sword. The cable car to Kuélap, once hailed as a gateway to sustainable development, has faced closures for maintenance and concerns about environmental impact. Still, responsible tourism programs guided by local cooperatives are turning visits into opportunities for education. Guides trained in archaeology and conservation teach visitors about delicate ecosystems, emphasizing the need to protect both the ruins and the surrounding cloud forest. Ecolodges source food from local farms and support reforestation projects, proving that heritage tourism can fund preservation when managed carefully. Global recognition and collaboration. International organizations such as UNESCO and ICOMS are working alongside Peruvian authorities to stabilize collapsed massive walls after recent structural issues caused partial collapses. These efforts involve engineers, climate scientists, and local craftspeople, skilled in traditional stonework and interdisciplinary collaboration that mirrors the hybrid character of Chachapoya culture. Itself, Peru's government has also integrated Chachapoya history into national curricula, ensuring that school children across the country learn not only about the Inca, but about the diverse civilizations that shaped the Andes and Amazon alike. Lessons. For a changing world, Chachapoya offer more than archaeological intrigue. They provide lessons in adaptation and resilience. Their cloud forest homeland is a zone of dramatic climate variation. Fog, heavy rains, sudden droughts. Their techniques for terrace farming, water management, and biodiversity conservation are increasingly relevant as modern societies confront climate change. Agronomists and ecologists now study these ancient methods for insights into sustainable living in fragile mountain ecosystems. A living heritage walk through a village near a lime bomba today, and you might hear the strains of a quena flute or see a loom threaded with bright geometric patterns. Children run across stone terraces that once supported maize and quinoa. Elders tell stories of ancestors who walked in the clouds and never surrendered their spirit to empire. These are not museum pieces. They are expressions of a living culture that continues to evolve. Local historians describe their identity not as a reenactment, but as a continuum, a river of memory that flows from the ancient fortress walls to modern kitchens, markets, and festivals. To them, the Chachapoya are not simply ancestors. They are family, closing reflection from the mist-laden heights of Kuélap to the echoing canyons of Karagia. The people of the clouds challenge the notion that great civilizations exist only in deserts or on open plains. They remind us that ingenuity thrives in the most improbable places, where mountain meets jungle, where fog conceals stone citadels, and where oral tradition carries wisdom across centuries. Today, every traveler who ascends the cable car, every child who learns an old melody, and every researcher who pieces together DNA strands participates in the continuing story of the Chachapoya. Their culture, once obscured by conquest and vegetation, now stands as a beacon of endurance and creativity. The Chachapoya were never lost. They were simply waiting for the world to listen, standing on the wind-swept ramparts of Kuélap at dawn. You can feel the Chachapoya presence long before the valley's morning mist lifts. The stones beneath your feet, each hand-cut block weighing several tons, are not silent. They murmur of a people who mastered the knife-edge world between the Andes and the Amazon. A world of sudden storms, steep precipices, and ceaseless green. To visit their homeland is to understand that civilization is not confined to broad plains or great rivers. It can flourish wherever human imagination and discipline take root. The thread of continuity, what makes the Chachapoya story resonate today, is not simply the grandeur of their fortresses or the mystery of their cliff tombs. It is the unbroken thread of culture that binds past to present. Local farmers still coax maize and potatoes from ancient terraces. Festival dancers echo steps performed hundreds of years ago. Weavers embed the same zigzag patterns into shawls and belts that archaeologists find on millennial textiles. These details reveal a truth that defies the narrative of extinction. Though Spanish chroniclers once declared the people of the clouds vanished, their descendants walk the streets of Chachapoya City and the trails of the Utcubamba Valley every day. Their language may have shifted and their faiths blended, but the core of their identity endures. Lessons for the present in an era of climate anxiety. The Chachapoya offer a model of resilient adaptation. They engineered hillside terraces to prevent erosion and capture rainfall, managed forests to balance biodiversity with agriculture, and built settlements that harmonize with the contours of mountains rather than defying them. Modern agronomists studying sustainable high-altitude farming increasingly look to these practices for guidance. Their history is equally instructive as a story of cultural survival. Empires rose around them, the Inca, then the Spanish, and each sought to absorb or erase them. Yet through quiet persistence, intermarriage, and a deep bond with their landscape, the Chachapoya spirit remained intact. For societies grappling with questions of identity and resilience, this endurance is a powerful lesson, a global legacy today. The name Chachapoya appears in scientific journals, travel magazines, art galleries, and classrooms across continents. Tourists who make the journey into the Peruvian cloud forest carry home more than photographs. They carry a sense of wonder at what human communities can achieve when they live in dialogue with their environment. Meanwhile, descendants and local historians are reshaping the narrative from within. Community-run museums, school programs, and artisan cooperatives ensure that interpretation does not belong solely to outside scholars. The people of the clouds are not just a subject of research, they are authors of their own story. Enduring mystery. Living culture, some questions will always hover like the fog that blankets Kuélap. Why did the Chachapoya choose such precarious cliffs for their sarcophagi? How exactly did they transport and fit those massive stones without iron tools or draft animals? Part of the fascination lies in this lingering mystery. Yet the more we learn, the clearer it becomes that their greatest achievement was not architectural, but cultural low capacity to adapt, to weave outside influences into a fabric uniquely their own, and to survive in memory and practice. Closing reflection as twilight settles and the mist returns to the fortress walls. It is easy to imagine the Chachapoya still watching from the ridges, guardians of a world where mountain meets jungle and history meets myth. Their story is neither a lost chapter nor a finished one. It is a continuing dialogue between stone and cloud, ancestor and descendant, past and future. For travelers, scholars, and the people who call this land home, the Chachapoya remain a reminder that civilizations are not measured solely by the empires they build or the wars they win, but by the creativity, resilience, and reverence for nature that allow them to endure long after the fog has rolled in and the chronicles have fallen silent.